Good evening, everybody. I'm David Morrison, Executive Director of Historic Harrisburg Association, and welcome to our long-running fourth Monday series of educational programs. Historic Harrisburg Association has been presenting educational programs almost always on the fourth Monday of the month for as long as we've existed, and that is going on 50 years. In February, Historic Harrisburg will celebrate its 50th anniversary, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Before I introduce our program, I want to tell you about some upcoming activities between now and February that might be of interest. On Saturday, November 19th, next month, we'll be conducting a Saturday morning walking tour from 10 to noon of the mansions of Cottage Ridge and the gems of historic old Uptown. And when I talk about Cottage Ridge, I'm referring to the 1900 block and the 2000 block of North 3rd Street, where there's some very large Victorian era mansions that were very popular in the 1880s, 1890s. That was before Front Street was the popular destination for people to build their mansions. So we'll be touring that. We'll be looking at Old Uptown, and then following that from noon to 3 on that same day, Saturday the 19th, we'll be having our first annual Old House Fair at the Donaldson Mansion on North 3rd Street, 2005 North 3rd Street, which has just been completely restored after years of being vacant. And it's a fantastic restoration job. It's going to be 6 large apartments. Justin Heinley, a former member of our board of directors, is the developer of that project, and he's going to be co-hosting our Old House Fair on that date. On our fourth Monday program, a month from tonight, on November 28th, is going to be titled Historic Preservation 101. And that's going to be a panel of professionals talking to you about how to go about preserving an old building or an old house. How do you deal with City Hall? How do you select a contractor? What are the rules? What are the best ways to go about it? How do you use an architect? We think it'll be very informative, and we also hope to have tickets on sale that night for our Candlelight House Tour, which comes up the following month on Sunday, December 11th. This will be our 49th annual Candlelight House Tour. The weekend before the house tour, December 2nd and 3rd, is our annual Elegant Progressions Black Tie Progressive Dinner Party, and that will be taking place in the historic environments of Hubbardston, Pennsylvania. And then, as I mentioned earlier, 2023 is our anniversary year, and we'll be having a lot of exciting things happening in that year, and we want you to please, if you're not a member of Historic Harrisburg, please join, because that way you'll find out about what's going on. You'll be able to come to these programs. In some cases, you get a discount if you're a member, and also you're supporting our mission, which is to promote historic preservation, urban revitalization, and smart growth. And we think that a lot has been accomplished, not only by Historic Harrisburg Association, but by the many members of our organization who buy houses, who fix up houses, who work in the city and do various things which we think advance the cause of improving our city. I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker. Dave Houseal is a retired from a distinguished career in the Harrisburg Fire Department. He's also a co-founder with me and with several others of what's now the Pennsylvania National Fire Museum in Uptown Harrisburg, in the old Riley Firehouse, which was slated for demolition after the city vacated it, but a number of historians prevailed, and Mayor Reed at the time was very receptive to the idea of restoring that beautiful old firehouse and turning it into a museum. And Dave has played a huge role as a past president of the museum and a longtime volunteer archivist and so forth. He's a great speaker. on the subject of firefighting and fire history in the Harrisburg area. And he's the author of a number of books about famous fires and firefighting and other aspects of the firefighting profession here in the Harrisburg area. So I think his program tonight, he's a very entertaining speaker. He knows his stuff. He's got a lot of great pictures. So without further ado, Dave, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Dave. It's been quite some time now since I put this program together, and I'm very informal when it comes to speaking, and sometimes I have a tendency to walk around too. So we'll see if we can, if we stay on track here. I have my cheering crowd behind me here that keeps me out, as I say, it keeps me out of the weeds, because at times, being an in-depth researcher, you always wind up digging up rabbit holes or going down rabbit holes, and one never knows what they're going to come up with. At different times, people have asked me different questions, being a firefighter. I have 27 years on the fire department here, and one of them is, what's the worst or what's the biggest fires that you ever attended to? I don't like to answer those questions. First off, because biggest is kind of ambiguous, because depending on if it's dollar loss or, whatever the size of the building or whatever. The second one, what's the worst one? Well, usually they involve something that was a tragedy. So, and firefighters generally don't like to talk about that. So, but another question that some people ask me is how many fires, especially pertaining to Harrisburg, because I am one of Harrisburg's kind of unseen historians. I know Ken Frew and some of the others that are more prominent. How many fires has Harrisburg had in its history? Well, that's a very good question, because I have no idea as an historian. I would venture to say that, just as a guess, I've seen records of them or whatever, probably well over 100,000 fires within the city limits. Now that's going back to the colonial days and coming up to the present. And actually runs you probably in the millions of actual fire alarms and things like that where the fire department's responding to. So how do you get that down into about a 45-minute talk? Well, because Dave called this, was it Harrisburg Ablaze? And actually the title Harrisburg Ablaze could be very good for a whole series of topics that we can cover. So I put this program together a couple of years ago, and this is the first time I've ever given it because of COVID and all this other stuff that we went through. What I did was, one of the most prominent, at least to me anyway, one of the most prominent boulevards or streets in Harrisburg is Market Street. And then I broke it even down further than that, because you don't want to go past, the railroad, past up the hill and out on the Market Street Hill. So I took the downtown section from the river to the railroad, and that's what we're going to cover tonight. And this is a look at Harrisburg Fire Department's operations, activities, and only the major fires, and maybe a few minor ones too. So, see if I can get the right buttons here. So I like to say this is through the lens of a fire bureau beacon ray. Too bad I didn't get to go around the way it should go. But I call this one the heart of the city. Market Street and Market Square, obviously, because Market Square is part of it. This one doesn't come out too well. This is actually a sketch that my grandfather did. My grandfather was one of the first Harrisburg fire historians, and that kept records. And we have 3 log books up at the museum that go back to the 1700s. Being an active volunteer back in the teens and the 20s, he actually took and researched the Citizen Fire Company number 3's minutes and also their log books, and he's the only one that actually come up with a lot of the earlier fires. The Harrisburg Fire Department official records only go back to 1918, and then cover up to 1999, but then the rest of it's all in the computers, which we don't have access to. So I'm going to quickly go through some of these areas. 1785, obviously, we talk about the first parts of the borough. 1791, the rest of that was added, and then Market Square, Market Street. And this is called, 1791 was the formation of the borough. I use references in this program tonight. There's a number of different references. Obviously, Google's one of them, and you'll see that used a lot, because I know when I'm dealing with or talking to people, people just love the then and nows, so they can orient yourself better to where I'm talking about. And I'm going to be flashing back and forth to a lot of these things. So references, the 1855 bird's eye view is one of the best ones for the early part of Harrisburg. 1881, Dauphin County Historical Society, I guess, does a reprint. I think they still do this one, which is a fantastic look at the city from another time period. These are aerial photographs. I can't remember if you can help me out, you can throw out a name if you want to. Charles Kunert, and these are in I believe the Hagley Museum down in, which are online and are available, and you can copy a very good high digital. This particular one's from 1927 because it shows downtown, and obviously the ubiquitous Google. But Google and all the views that you can get off Google is a tremendous asset when you're putting these kind of programs together. Okay, first thing we're going to look at is borough fire protection back in the colonial period. We'll start with 1791. The Union Fire Company was formed. Now, there was 10 companies in what we fire historians call the hand era, meaning the apparatus was pulled by hand and it was pumped by hand. So we won't talk too much about the apparatus. That's for another time and another program. But for those who collect things or look at the history of things, you can see the dates. The Union Fire Company was the first one formed. They lasted until 1836, so that's what the second column is. These are the other companies that were organized. Some of them didn't last too long for whatever the reasons were. But you see that there's 6 of them that wind up, for anyone who collecting or anybody has read early history of Harrisburg, you'll see these names crop up all the time. And they're the predominant, I call them the permanent companies as they were formed. These are all volunteer fire companies within the city. So tonight we're going to start on Market Street with the first block. Now obviously the first block would have been from 0 to 99, but the first block on Market Street is actually the river going to the West Shore. And the most prominent fire that occurred in that space would have been the Camelback Bridge. If for some reason somebody can come up with a picture or even some kind of a drawing of the original bridge on the East Shore, I would like to see it, because that one was built by Theodore Burr very quickly from 1813 to 1817. The first part of the bridge was destroyed by flood in 1847. I'm assuming that the bridge looked like this. This is the West Shore. But I've never seen any photographs. Well, they wouldn't have photographs then, not from 1847 back. But I'm assuming it was built, on the same par as this. Just give you a quick overview. Then on May 21st, or May 25th, 1866, the eastern part was destroyed by fire. So that's the first major fire that occurs on Market Street, going from Market Street from the direction of travel that we're going to be doing. Must have been a very spectacular fire for obvious reasons. The fire department was on the scene quickly, but they didn't have much of a chance for stretching lines and actually putting the fire out. There was a breeze blowing from the west to the east, so it actually blew it, through the tunnel or the bridge itself. And it was an all-wooden structure. They claim it started somehow, they don't know what the cause of the fire was, on the 4th span out into the river, so it would have been in the middle. And you saw the interior picture of that. It doesn't give you much room to maneuver, and I wouldn't, even a firefighter today, I think be pretty gutsy to try to even make an entry into something like that. knowing that you really don't have much of a chance to fight the fire. So the building or the bridge was destroyed. Then on 1902, it was rebuilt then as this section, and then in 1902, both sections were destroyed by the flood. So, and I'll quickly go through the rest of the bridge to continue with the bridge history. The two-lane part was then added in 1904, and this is the other way looking back towards Market Square. It was widened to 4 lanes in 1927. The concrete arch was added, and then the other part, the two-lane iron part was floated around to the other side, and that's the present bridge that you have. Okay, another fire, which I don't have pictures of it because the photographs that I do have of it are newspaper photographs and they're terrible quality because I got these photographs off of microfilm, which didn't lend it any other help. And the fire occurred on City Island, right adjacent to Market Street. And it was on July 29th, 1931. Anybody here in this room have ever heard of they could call it the SS, or it was just the Stephen Decatur? Stephen Decatur was, and I know Dave's going to really enjoy this one. The Stephen Decatur was a 180-foot long, 20-foot wide, 25-foot wide vessel that was built on the island where they store over the winter, where they store the Pride of the Susquehanna, and it was used by the Sea Scouts, which was like the Boy Scouts, but they were well, I guess there is still Sea Scouts, the troops and stuff like that. I mean, 3 different troops met in this thing. It was made when they tore the silk mill down. They salvaged a lot of the timbers that were in the silk mill, and they drug them over to the island, and it became that prominent. It had 2 90-foot masts on this thing, so it looked like a schooner on dry land. It was a sizable ship if it would have ever floated, but it was never made that way. It was built as a training facility. The Pennsylvania Railroad actually cast a 250-pound locomotive bell in the shops over here in Harrisburg for it, and it had Stephen Decatur on it. I don't know what happened to all this stuff. But anyway, it went up in a spectacular fire. They were doing some work on it in July of 1931 of varnishing the decks and things like that. And they claimed it was spontaneous combustion. By the time the fire department got there, which was fairly quick, that the alarm was sounded, it was going pretty good, and they had to stretch lines because it was so far away from hydrants. Or I know it was in the island, it was surrounded by the river, but you had to get down to the river to get water. It was actually rebuilt then within that year, later on that year, 1931. By 1936, during the flood of 1936, it was badly damaged and it was leveled. So that was the end. It only lasted 6 years, but that was a pretty spectacular fire for Market Street. Now the next one we're going to talk about is, and I don't know how much you know about the early history, and there's a question that always comes up, at least to people that look at Front Street. 1857, we had 4 active fire companies within the borough. These were all hand-pulled, had small pumpers to operate with. The Hope number 2 is in the same place as the Firehouse Restaurant is today. So, but it was not in that particular building. That building was built in 1871. The borough built a structure about 1854 in that location. The next company was a Citizen company, Citizen number 3, and they were located in the 8th Ward on Walnut Street, just north of, on 4th Street, just north of Walnut Street. Obviously, that firehouse came down in 1970 when they expanded and tore down the 8th Ward. The Washington number 4 was a hose company. Their first firehouse was located at South 2nd and Meadow Lane, where the entrance is to going into that complex. It used to be called Washington Square. I'm not sure what it's called now. Opposite Washington Street. It was located in that in that area, and the Friendship Number One's quarters were located on Front Street, on the west side of Front Street, which is that particular little building. If you've ever wondered, when you looked at this 1855 lithograph of the city, which is tremendously detailed, by the way, and it shows it as 1.5 story, and I don't know if that's a bell tower or what it is, but that was the Friendship Number One's firehouse. Now the fire was someone, and it had been there for almost 30 years. So someone ignited a fire, it was an arson fire, pretty badly wrecked the firehouse in September 20th, 1853. They managed to drag the fire apparatus out. There was a hand pumper and a couple of hose reels. They got them out, but there was some damage to the apparatus. They replaced the apparatus eventually by 1857. So, and now as the other companies were starting to itch and control city or borough council to build themselves newer firehouses on the 2-story brick, more permanent firehouses, so did the Friendship. So the Friendship gets council to appropriate the money. Council starts tearing the building down on July of 1858, but repercussions happen right away. This is a very affluent neighborhood, and there's a lot of money people living in this neighborhood, and they didn't like a bunch of young toughs and who likes to carouse and drink and carry on. I'm not saying bad things about volunteer firefighters, but if anybody ever studied the colonial period and back in the hand there was a lot of fights and a lot of riotous conditions, and Harrisburg was no different. So they filed an injunction in Dauphin County Court to stop the construction of the firehouse. They gave them a temporary injunction. Then on May 16th, 1859, there was a hearing in Dauphin County Court, and the judge issued, it's for my dad, at the hearing the court dissolved the temporary injunction that had been issued the year before. And it then granted a perpetual one, which prevented any person or persons thereafter building any structure whatsoever on the riverbank. And there's also a little bit more to the story where when you dig into the court case, the judge actually did his homework on it, and he came up with the fact that Front Street is considered from the east curb to the low water mark of the river. Oh. So technically nothing can be built on Front Street. How the Civic Center or how that was ever built, I don't know. That's one you can look up, Dave.
Here's my hunch on that, Dave. The Civic Club was built by a Mr. Fleming, who was not with Gannett Fleming Engineering, but he was of a different engineering concern, which designed the waterworks right next door. And somehow the water system always involved large houses, because Reservoir Park has a mansion for the caretaker's mansion. I mean, the caretaker of the reservoirs had a mansion, and so the designer of the water system and the waterworks there on Front Street, Front and North Street, built his house next to it. He died a few years later, and his widow bequeathed the house to the Civic Club.
Okay. There are 3 buildings on the west side of Front Street, and they are the pumping station, that building that you're talking about, and the other pumping station, which is the sewer pumping station, right down by the Dock Street dam. Other than that, there are no structures, and you can blame the Friendship Fire Company and their rowdiness for that reason. They did, the next year in 1859, they did build the city, or the borough built them a new firehouse on South 3rd Street, just south of Chestnut, where Pennsylvania Place is now. Okay, where are we at here? That's the caretaker's house, or the toll taker's house for the bridge. Now we'll quickly go through the more permanent companies that wound up building firehouses permanently for these different ones. And that's, of course, that's a formation year. These are the 6 volunteer companies that were downtown Harrisburg. And their location, when you look at more, this is a more broad view now, the 1881 view, the Citizen number 3, oh, I'm sorry, that's the Friendship number 1 up there on South 3rd Street. Excuse me. The Hope number 2, that's the Firehouse Restaurant as you know it today. The Citizens, Washington number 4, the Paxton number 6, and the Mount Vernon Hook and Ladder Company. So, and then as they disappeared, those 2, the Citizen number 3, these went in 1917 due to the expansion of the 8th Ward. The city lost 2 firehouses. The next one to disappear downtown was in 1937 when a movement was on foot to have a centralized fire station, which never materialized. And in the process, as money became available through the WPA program, the Paxton Firehouse, which is on South 2nd Street, was built. They tore the original station down, which was built during the Civil War, built this one, and they took the fire company from the Friendship and moved them down there. The next one to go was in 1959. In that block, or the series of blocks between Chestnut and Mulberry, when redevelopment took that area out. That was Washington number 4. And then the Hope was closed in 1980 when we did the major consolidation of firehouses into stations 1 and 2. And then the Paxton was closed in 2014. I have a whole PowerPoint on all of the city's downtown firehouses. Okay, 100 block, Front Street to Market Square. There's a quick look at it from 1855. And we'll look at it going this way from 1881, 1927, and to then.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite changed, obviously. Now this is going to be a lot of then and nows, and I'm going to go through these fairly. I'll give you some gaps so you can get an idea, but just to give you an idea what that one block, well, it's actually 2 blocks because it's divided by River Street, what it looked like in days gone by. That's the Board of Trade building. That's what's there now. Is that still called a Blackstone? Oh, it's a veteran building. Dauphin County has it as a veteran building. This is the corner, the front corner, the northeast corner of Front and Market Street. And I'm not sure when that building was built. It was the Harrisburg Club. A rather substantial building, and I understand there was a lot of activity went on in there. It was quite the civic organizations that held that. But, like a lot of places in downtown Harrisburg, this one went up in a blaze of glory. And as you can see, it's October 30th, 1964, 12:07 a.m. It was about a 4-alarm equivalent fire, which brought a lot of outside aid into the city. There was numerous firemen were injured. One hung in the balance for a number of days, but they suspected he may wind up passing. So, but that never occurred. I remember my dad coming home and getting me out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, because he worked for the Patriot News. And he said, "Come on, we're going to go watch a fire." So there's a number of pictures of this fire.
That was the Harrisburg Club building.
Right.
Okay.
It was vacant at the time. They had closed down.
Wow.
And it was suspicious. It was of suspicious origin. Other than that, they really don't know. That's the guy in the white hat in the middle is my grandfather. He was fire chief from 1959 to 1967. That's on Market Street, looking west towards the bridge, and that's what's the. You'll have to shout out what's there now, because some of these places I don't know what the names of them are. Across from that is the Dauphin County Courthouse. That was built in 1941. Then we have the Senate Hotel, just some, that was involved in a fire, which I'll talk about a little bit later. On the corner, what's the name of that building? I guess it doesn't really matter. But it's
The Durbin Building.
Durbin Building, that's right. Okay. And that's what's in that location. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a walk or stand kind of in the center of the square and look around the square. And as we come to certain things, then I can relate to you what transpired in that area. This is looking east. Same direction. Quite different from what it was at one time. A lot of these buildings came down in the 70s and 80s. The ones were still standing. We had numerous fires in a lot of these buildings, but not of great magnitude, because the fire department got in fairly quickly and knocked the fires down and saved the structures. On the corner of, this is the Hilton over here, looking east. Now we're going to look northeast. Again, the Hilton and the new high-rise that's next to it. These are probably one of the few buildings that are left from, or either weren't touched or were built right after this. June 25th, 1828 was the first major conflagration in the city, or the borough, I should say. And it took out the whole block of buildings from the square, from Market Street to Strawberry back to Court. Fire protection was very primitive. Bucket brigades and hand pumpers was the order of the day. And when you're using a hand pumper and bucket brigades, you're not moving too much water when all these frame buildings catch fire. These are the buildings that then took the place of the lot that burned. Kaplan's. Some of the older residents of the city or around here always remember Kaplan's going into the drugstore. And then it started to be torn down. I'm going to say between the 70s and into the 90s is when redevelopment tore a lot of these buildings down. We have the Bolton House. Bueller's Hotel was originally built, I'm not sure, I think it was in the 1820s is when the building was built. One of those major buildings downtown that anybody on the fire department was always keyed up that if a call came in for the Bolton, well, at that time when I was on the fire department, it was called the Warner, and it was a little substandard housing at the time. But why we never lost the building? Because it actually was a frame building. It was wood the whole way up to the top of that thing. But early on, they installed a sprinkler system in that building. So it's one of the few buildings that had a major sprinkler system in it downtown. And that's the reason we had a lot of fires in it, but there were always a small fire because the sprinkler systems usually handled it. So that's why the Warner stood till the very end. Looking north to the northwest corner, USF&G Building, City Hall. Penn National, is that Penn National? Yeah, Penn National Insurance. That's what it did look like, probably 100 years before that. In the probably 1870s, 1880s. That's where City Hall is today. Oop. Go back to it. Oh, I'm going too far. There. Let's slow down. And of course, us old timers remember the spot. the first spot, which was opened in 1940, I think, 41. Looking southwest, the corner where the building is, where the Dauphin County's offices are now, that building was built as Commonwealth National Bank, I believe, after they tore the old Sears and Roebuck down. The most prominent structure there is obviously the Market Square Presbyterian Church. 1855, it was not there. So it was built in, I think 1859 is when the structure was built. Now, major fires, I should go back, well, I'll see it, I'll bring it up again. Market Square Presbyterian Church had a major fire in it on April 24th, 1886. Lightning struck the steeple up near the top, and the steeple is 206 feet high, way past the ability of the fire department at that time. The highest ladder that the city had was a 65-foot area ladder, and 65 feet only went to the bottom part of the steeple. So it took the fire department, the firemen, almost an hour to work their way up inside. They took out the windows near the top of that and finally lowered hose lines down, or lowered ropes down, and pulled a hose line up to the top part of the steeple. But the top part from those windows at the very top up to the top were actually burned off. That's an acorn. It's a 7-foot high acorn at the top of that, wooden acorn at the top of that. Oh, this is much later because this is during recent motorized trucks there. This is the Sears and Roebuck, which is at the corner now where the Dauphin County building is. I don't know when the original building was built, but it was built as there was buildings there that were called the Baltimore Merchandise Store. In 1902, it was gutted by fire. It was rebuilt. 1904, it was gutted by fire again in a major fire. So then it was rebuilt as this building, and it was Kaufman's furniture, it was a department store, and that in turn, in January 1915, was gutted by a major fire. So this corner has experienced quite a few major fires. Finally, the building was torn down in the 1990s, I believe, and when the Commonwealth National Bank built there. So we'll continue on around the square to the southeast corner, and this building here. Obviously, there's no fires in this building, but and there is very little left from the original downtown on the square. The buildings to the other side of that are some of the more original buildings, or more of the older buildings that are left standing. This on the corner was originally I believe it was called the Jones House, then it was, and that's where Lincoln stayed, then it was the Commonwealth Hotel, eventually became the Dauphin Building. And you'll find it in a lot of postcards and a lot of photographs of the square at different times. There was a lot of offices, there was rooms, it was a hotel, a major hotel. And its first, although there was fires before this in the building, that the fire department saved the structure, April 12th, 1921 was the largest fire of magnitude that pretty much gutted the building. And it was the first time that the fire department actually had a call. At that time, the fire department was 16 companies, about 21 pieces of apparatus. It was a fairly large fire department. Had to actually call outside aid. Steelton brought apparatus in. Mechanicsburg brought apparatus over to actually help fight the fire. There was one of the firemen, it says on one here, it said one of them almost died. He fell off of a ladder. It was an Allison Hook and Ladder Company man. He fell off a ladder and almost broke his back, but he managed to survive $300,000 loss in 1921 was a big fire. There are some a few views of the fire, and then they turn around and rebuild it. It looks like they might have taken a story off of it and rebuilt it again. And this is what it was as a Dolphin. I think it was called the Dolphin Building. And then that was succumbed to the Wreckers Ball later on, and that's when they built the high rise that's there now. We're going to work our way into the 200 block. The most prominent building today, which can orient yourself to the past, is the old bank building. It was Dolphin Deposit, but I don't know what the original bank building was. It's on the right side where the pillars are, which is built in the 1820s, I think. It's one of the oldest, I think it is the oldest building downtown, in the immediate downtown section. There's a lot of buildings not in existence from the old Harrisburg. Whitaker Center, and now we're up on top looking down at it. See, in Google, wonderful. This is the block as the, in 1853, then 1881, it's running this way. 1937. Back to the view again. Now to your immediate left, tucked back on the side, is the courthouse. The original, well, it's the second Dauphin County courthouse. The first one, and I'm not sure it was about 1850s, I believe, occupied the same location along Court Street, obviously Court and Market. This building was built in 1860. Prominent to the fire department, although we never had any major fires in it, but prominent to the fire department in the big tower, the steeple that was on top of it, had a 2,400-pound bell that they would strike out for court case, for court, and for any other reason. But in 1874, the city of Harrisburg purchased a Gamewell telegraph firearm system. The little red boxes that hung on the street corners. It was the first quick way of notifying fire departments of a fire. If you've never seen one in operation, please come to the Fire Museum because we have a fully operational Gamewell firearm headquarters out of the city of Johnstown. And we can give you lessons on how it all works. So I won't get into that. But the tower bell, when they struck an alarm, it would ring out the box number on the courthouse bell originally. It had an electric striker that electrically it would tap out the box number. So it was just like, and every time I would go downtown and I would hear the church bells striking on the quarter hour at the Market Square Presbyterian Church, I just can envision how that sounded when a box was coming in with the courthouse bell. I put it at that one because that happened to be a photographer, a news photographer caught my mother in 1944. She worked as a secretary for the Central Iron and Steel. Lochiel Hotel. Today the Lochiel Hotel would be this building here. That's what they call the Lochiel Hotel. Down off of Chenoy Street. Although I think they renamed it, I believe. It was up for sale for a while. But the original Lochiel Hotel was this building here, which eventually became, as it was passed down, became the Colonial Theater and Colonial Hotel originally. I don't know if it was a hotel or it was a theater or not. But box 4 was the lowest numbered box. When I was on the fire department, we had 220 boxes, those little red street, those fire alarm boxes that we answered. And box 4 was the lowest numbered box. And box 4 was one of those, if it ever struck in on the alarm system, you could almost guarantee you had a major fire. Most major fires in downtown all came in on box 4. Colonial Theater. In that whole block, there are other fires. Remember what I said, there might have been 100,000 fires in the city in its history. But the Colonial Theater suffered from 2 different fires and a collapse. First major fire that I've uncovered was on February 7th, 1945. Fire caught the inside. It started and burned the lobby out, burned some of the stores that were in it. 15 firemen were injured, and I don't know, they estimated quite a bit of loss to it. Several firemen were injured. The second one, I was on this particular fire, and this one occurred on October 30th, 1974. And it was one of those, Box 4 was struck. At that time, Box 4 had been changed in 1970 to Box 43. The numbers were changed. And when the battalion chief got on the scene right away, all he yelled over the radio was, "It's the Colonial Theater." That's all he had to say. Because it brought every fire buff and fire enthusiast and volunteer from outside the city, because they were listening to it on the radios, brought them into the city because this was one of those that everybody wanted to see go down, or go up in a blaze of glory. There was a number of buildings like that in the city that we always talked about. But the fire department did one super knockdown of the fire, held it to the building, and then that's what it looked like after the fire. The building was vacant, it was up for sale. And then eventually, in 1983, and I don't know how many of you remember this, the roof structures, the roof members were giving way because it had been vacant for so long, and water had leaked through the roof. You're talking a building that was probably dated back to the 1800s anyway, and it wound up crushing a couple cars. Fortunately, it happened in the middle of the day. It was quite fortunate that nobody was trapped underneath there when the building just gave way and came down. And now that's what it looks like today. 225 mark. The courthouse. The original courthouse was this one. It was built in the 1850s. Then this one came along, and I believe they tore this down in the 1930s. Late 1930s, 1940s, I guess it was when they built the new one. Whitaker Center. 300 block. I'll have to step it up here a little bit. David will call me down. Take a quick glance up 3rd Street. Changed considerably, did it, from 100 years ago. Swing back to Market Street again. The Google view doesn't make it look that big. That's the same corner. And we're heading east. That big building in the side, in the middle of that is Pomeroy's. The Pomeroy's is not there anymore because Harrisburg University is there. Some of the old structures, they're more the facades of the old structures than the old structures themselves. Looking west from 4th Street, just to orient yourself, that's Harrisburg University. Rachel Carson building. It's from the same location. The city was just quite different back then. Looking up 4th Street, just underneath the Capitol building would have been the Citizen number 3, their firehouse. This building over here that is Pomeroy's, which was later, a whole facade was added to it. To make it look like that. Now we're going to go back to 3rd and Market. That's the Feller, well, we called it the Feller building in the fire department. Because it had Feller's Men's Store in it, but it's the proper name for it's the Kunkel building. Next to that building, you'll notice there was it was like vacant. It was a low one-story buildings in there. As you can see what they are there, the two buildings on the other side. First major fire that occurred there was on February 17th, 1868. It was King's Hardware Store. They had 55 or big barrels of oil, coal oil, were stored in the basement. The building caught fire. The fire occurred in the basement. The fire department was all volunteer at the time. They raced into the building, took lines downstairs, and the building exploded. There was, it was what we called it as a historian, it was the second worst night in the Harrisburg Fire Department history. There was 25 firemen, 2 police officers were injured, 6 of those were very serious, that hung in the balance for a number of days.
What was the date?
1868, February 17th, 1868. This is the second major fire that occurred on that same location, was called the Youth Center Fire, May 28, 1960. And it was at 305 and 307 Market Street. Fire started in the late afternoon. These pictures were taken early in the fire, and the fire was in the basement. And they opened up, those basements actually on those old buildings went the whole way out to the street, to the curb line. So that the sidewalks were actually over, there was basement underneath there. These were old steam heat buildings. And they claimed that the cause of the fire was wood that had been hit by steam, a steam leak for 30 years, that had carbonized the wood, and eventually it self-ignited. And they had a very difficult time because the fire department at that time did not have self-contained breathing apparatus. They had filter masks. They had to bring self-contained breathing apparatus. The only fire company around here was Lemoyne that had them, and Columbia Park had some, and they had to bring those companies in later on. So what it did was it felled, 35 firemen were felled by smoke inhalation during the course of the fire. Got to include a picture of my dad with that. He was the chief of progress at the time. He's the guy with the white hat. I used that for the cover of my first book. It just went on and on and on, probably a good 10 hours a day, because it was basically a deep-seated fire, and eventually the floors collapsed in on top of it. 4 to 500 block from 4th Street up to the subway. I got some notes here. The subway was built, originally the subway, the grade crossing at the subway across Market Street was called the Avenue of Blood or the Avenue of Death. Up until 1900, it was catastrophic for people being hit by trains, because it was a nightmare to try to get across that location, and Market Street being the major thoroughfare in and out of the hill, from the downtown out to the hill area. It was just crazy to try to get over there. In the newspapers, when you're in newspapers.com, if you just search the accidents at the Market Street crossing, you'll find it's almost a daily occurrence. So we have Market Street looking east. The original subway was 2 lanes. It was the north side. It was built 1901, 1902. It was widened to 4 lanes, the 4 lanes that are there now in 1928. Accidents, there was far too many to list. However, there was an unusual fire that occurred on June 29, 1972, and I'm going to shift just to the other side of the railroad for a minute. When you go down there, and I found this, I added this one a little bit later. I don't have a picture of the building. There's a little nondescript brick or stone building that sits as you come up out of the subway, or as they dive down into the subway. It's on the north side. It's right alongside the subway. That's a pumping station. When high water in the river comes back through Paxton Creek, it floods the subway because it's a low spot. There's a major pumping station in there that they can pump it out. During the 72 flood, it was all filled with water, obviously. In fact, it was filled to the top of the subway. And there was 3 men were working to clean after the water had been subsided. There was 3 men working down in this little pumping station. It was basically a subfloor. And they were cleaning things with gasoline and solvents. And they didn't have it ventilated very well. They don't know what started the fire, but it was an arc from something exploded. It was a flash fire, and 3 men eventually died. 2 of them died. This is July 29th. 2 of them died. I'm sorry, June 29th. 2 of them died July 1st and 3rd, and the 3rd man died on the 15th. So it's one of the more tragic fires that occurred on Market Street. That's that entrance right there. That's Aberdeen Street. Quite changed, isn't it? We will revisit this intersection again. Over here's that's the pumping station. The original that's the original Union Station, or the Pennsylvania Railroad Station. Across the street on the north side was the Reading Station, and you can see the plethora of tracks, switch towers, and everything else. And at that time, the railroads were the only major source of transportation. Subway construction photos of the 2-lane part. You notice all the buildings that are on the north side of Market Street in the 500 block. They're all built. It's kind of looking west. That's 5th and Market. Same location when redevelopment started tearing it all down. Now it's a parking garage. So we tore a lot of buildings down and made parking lots. Well, we did. Okay. We're going to back up to the intersection of 4th and Market. There was 2 major conflagrations happened in 1838. First one occurred on July 20th, and it was on the northeast corner. Second one occurred on October 21st, and it was on the southeast corner. The first one burned stables, houses, and a lumber yard. The second one burned houses, a planing mill, and also it took down the first Zion Lutheran Church, or severely damaged it, not the one that's there now. The only thing that saved the rest of the town that night, or those days, both those days, was a little engine called the Tiger. That was the first hand pumper in the city of Harrisburg, well, the borough of Harrisburg, that would actually, it's very similar to the one that's inside the museum, the Farm Museum is in there, but that engine could actually lift its own water. It had hard suctions on it that you could park it alongside a water source and you could pump the water into it. The Citizen number 3 had it. They also had 1,000 feet of leather hose, which was sheets of leather that were put together and riveted together with copper rivets, very primitive for today, but it worked back then, and they pumped from the canal up to, and that's what stopped the fires. Both the fires. December 23rd, 1874. This is first line of duty death that occurred downtown that I have record of. While there was a call came in for South Street and West Alley in the 8th Ward for a house fire. This was the Friendship No. 1's firehouse and their apparatus. The men actually pulled the apparatus, this steam fire engine. That's the first steamer in the city. They pulled it by hand. They pulled all the apparatus by hand. This is before they got horses. There was a young guy by the name of George Hotcorn, who belonged to the Paxton, happened to be in the vicinity of this firehouse, and he helped them pull the apparatus to the fire. At 4th Street, or at Market Street, he stumbled, fell down, and the apparatus rolled over his body below his waist. And sadly, 2 days later, he succumbed to his injuries and left a wife and 3 small children destitute. Because back then they passed the hat, got what they could, and you're on the road. Quite different from today. That would have been the same engine being pulled by hand. We have just, and we still uncover line of duty deaths that were buried in history. Right now, up at on the memorial wall, we're up to 20 now from the city. We just picked up another one. Not picked up. We just found out about another one.
So not the most recent, but you found one that wasn't known until recently.
Oh yeah. Oh, I found a number of them like that.
Wow.
Because remember, the only place we're getting our information is there's no records from back then. It's whatever we're finding in the newspapers, and that's from newspapers.com. It's tremendous. 4th and Market again. We're going to stay with 4th and Market. Only this time we have a wreck of an apparatus. It's the worst apparatus or wreck or collision involving fire apparatus in the city's history. February 8, 1932. Box 45 at 5th and Walnut was pulled at 8:40 p.m. for a small car fire that was up on the State Street Bridge. Answering the box, this is the Washington number 4. Their firehouse was at 2nd and Chestnut. They come down into Market Square, made the turn on Market Street, and they roared out Market Street. The second piece of apparatus was the Friendship number 1's engine. If you go past the Alderman's office, you'll be in the rear of the Salem Salem Reformed Church. So at Oriental, where this firehouse was at. He came out, the driver came out, and instead of going up to 3rd to Market, for some reason he made the turn on the Chestnut and made the left turn on the 4th, and at 4th and Market, both rigs came together with a very loud crash. 8 men were hurt. The hose wagon was flipped on its roof. 8 men were hurt. 2 of them very seriously. The driver he had very serious back injuries. His name was Harry Smith. He was pinned under the apparatus. Never drove after that. He was crippled for life. That's what the wagon looked like afterwards. Again, we're staying at this intersection. You take notice that there's just a large amount of hotels all through this area. I lost count of the amount of hotels that were in this. That's the St. James. This one here is the St. James, and what was left of the St. James. There was the Milner. There was the Colonial. The closer to the railroad tracks and the station you got, the more hotels you had. And they weren't places like the Hilton and Crown Plaza either. On the northeast corner where the major conflagration in 1938 occurred was the Induction Center. Now the Induction Center was where 3 of the Harrisburg draft boards were located in 1943 during the war. It was the Coliseum building. It was called the Coliseum building, and it covered quite a bit, almost half of the block from 4th Street heading east, and from Strawberry over to Market Street. The fire occurred. Fire was started somehow. They don't know what the original cause of the fire was. It started in the rear of the Leader store at 406 Market Street. Quickly mushroomed to the rear of the store, and then tied up, needless to say, it tied up the fire department all night long. 10 stores were destroyed or gutted pretty bad. The draft boards were forced to relocate their operations. The roof on the inside, the Coliseum was a dance hall. The roof collapsed inside. I've always trying to, Ken Flew was always looking for pictures of the Coliseum, and I can't find them. I gave him a set of these, The fire occurred at night, obviously, so not the greatest, but when you really study these photographs, I have high resolution digital copies. That's Pomeroy's behind it. That's what we call spaghetti in the fire service. When you just keep laying more lines and more lines and more lines on top of each other.
Why?
More water.
Oh, okay.
Big fire takes lots of water. And that's the location as it was after the Coliseum. Some of the building was torn apart. It was still some of the stores in the Lowe's Theater. They stopped the fire from, or they held the fire from going into Lowe's Theater. Then they tore the whole block down in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess it was. You see Pomeroy's in the back. And now the Rachel Carson building is built there. Still, it's amazing how downtown looks now compared to when it looked like that. The last fire I'm going to talk about is the New Plaza Hotel. February 2nd, 1976, 11:47 p.m., box 451 at 5th and Market was pulled by a passerby that discovered the smoke coming out of the building, ran to the corner, pulled the hook on the box. Immediately on the first arrival of the first in apparatus, they started yelling for help on the radio. The hotel was almost full that night. We're talking a 5-story building. The top 2 floors didn't have occupancies, but the lower 3 floors did. And I always called this fire Harrisburg Fire Department's finest hour. The 3 alarms that came right away rescued over ladders, out, down smoke-choking hallways, or over the tower buckets. They rescued over 60 people out of the building and they never lost a life. Actually, the fire department itself, it was 7 engines, 4 ladder trucks, a squad company. They were involved in heavy rescue work, and they never really put a drop of water on the fire. It was when the outside companies started coming in from the east and west shore is when they started pouring water on the fire. The fire was pretty much, or the building was pretty much gone, for the most part. Happened in the dead of winter, obviously. The fire it was an arson fire. A guy had a fight with his girlfriend, and his room, he set the bed on fire. She left, and he set the bed on fire, I guess as a revenge. Unfortunately, that room had a vent or something that was next to the open elevator shaft. Oh. And the fire transmitted in the elevator shaft. You remember, none of these buildings had sprinklers. And immediately raced to the top of the building. And as it raced up, it also was, had extended fire into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors. There's still quite a few guys around that worked that fire. I happened to be off that night. And I sat out at the fire. I was chief at Progress, and I sat out at the firehouse in the watch desk, and I listened to it, and I just kept thinking, this is going to be Harrisburg's worst fatalities for fire. And then after that, everything filtered back and said that there was not a life lost. It was just absolutely amazing. Very spectacular fire. And of course, the end of February, everything iced up. They did catch the guy. He jumped on a bus and went to Lancaster, and that's where they caught him. And then they tore the building down after. That was the last major fire of huge proportions on Market Street. And it was one of the last major fires downtown in downtown Harrisburg. Now, there were other fires in the 70s. That was in 1976, so you're going back 45 years. The Colonial Theater which was in 1978. I did show you that one, but we stopped the fire. Senate Hotel had a fire on the second floor, which could have been of great magnitude, but they made a great knockdown on that one too. Strawberry Inn was not on Market Street, it was up at 2nd and Walnut, which I was working that night. That was in 1984. There was a major fire in the Fulton Bank building. There was PennDOT was in 1994, but for the most part, downtown Harrisburg has been fairly secure from major fires ever since this time period. And why? Well, first off, Harrisburg has a very excellent fire department. Highly trained, very quick, and very aggressive. There are most of the old buildings, and I know you're Historic Harrisburg and you're into historic preservation, but you know most of the old buildings in downtown Harrisburg don't exist anymore. That's where the fires occur, were in these old structures. And the last thing that I got to give a shout out for Mayor Reed, because during Mayor Reed's second, I guess it was his second term of office, he got the fire department and city council to enact one of the strictest fire codes ever written for any city in the United States. That just about any building, when you go around this city and you start delving or getting into a lot of these buildings, and you've seen them, almost everything has sprinklers in the buildings. Sprinklers stop fires from getting big. So there was a fire down here off of Cameron and Paxton. That went to 4 Arms a number of years ago, and we were sitting up at the museum talking about this, and that's the first major fire that Chief Enterline had in his 8-year career as chief. And so it's amazing the amount. Yes, Harrisburg's still getting fires, but they're up there in the more the Allison Hill, the uptown area, in areas where a lot of crime areas and things like that do occur. But downtown, for the most part, and now the state finally came on board and they sprinklered. After PennDOT, they learned their lesson. They finally wound up sprinkling all the major state buildings. So that's my presentation for tonight. Ran a little late, but
that was wonderful, Dave. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions for Dave Houseal?
That's why I like it.
That was just wonderful because it's a combination of fire history, city history, and architectural history. You put it all together beautifully. So thank you very much, Dave. That was great. Great. So thank you all for coming, those of you who came, and thank you for watching and listening, those of you who tuned in. See you in a month. Thank you.